Good evening. I'm Steve Byers. I'm the chair of Friends of Hackmatack. And on behalf of the Friends, welcome to our March Friends Gathering. This is an opportunity to share information or a particular topic with our friends. And they're open to the public. And again, welcome to everyone. I have the honor of introducing Cassie Skaggs and then our refuge manager. And then I'll ask Cindy, one of our board members, to introduce our guest speaker. So with that, I think I'll just go ahead and ask our refuge manager, Cassie Skaggs, to say just a few words about kingfishers and why they are relevant from her perspective.
Thanks, Steve. So as some of you know, and if you're new to the Friends of Hackmatack, I am the refuge manager of Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, which is a bi-state refuge in Illinois and Wisconsin. The history of Hackmatack, it was established in 2012 with a generous 12-acre donation, formally establishing the refuge. And then some of these Friends board members that are helping pull this together, I like to refer them as the dream team. Not only in working with them and seeing all of the wonderful things they accomplished, but they literally dreamed of this National Wildlife Refuge. They saw how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service could plug into local efforts and have a large conservation impact. So I really appreciate them. And if you get a chance to talk with them more about Hackmatack, I implore you to do so. With that whole conservation effort has already protected over 2,000 acres of land in the area, not even necessarily at Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, just overall in general. And a lot of those efforts are along the Nippersink Creek and the Nippersink Creek watershed. And as we were thinking about the branding for Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, we wanted a species that really would stand out and be something that caught people's eye, and maybe not something everyone sees super easily or frequently, something you need to go somewhere and look for. And not only are they pretty charismatic with that cool looking mohawk that they have, but they're really beautiful, and you see them along the Nippersink Creek here at Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. The rebranding effort is an effort by the National Wildlife Refuge System to update our signage and be more relevant to the American public. And Hackmatack being an urban national wildlife refuge, I can't think of a better species. Furthermore, the Friends of Hackmatack helped pick this as well. So it wasn't just me thinking, oh, this will be cool. There's a lot of folks here that put thought and effort into saying, hey, out of these options, and we could have had an artist draw a completely different animal, we all still chose the belted kingfisher. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Cindy to introduce our speaker for the evening.
Great. Thank you, Cassie. So it's my pleasure to introduce Marina Richie, who's a nature writer and environmental activist who lives in Bend, Oregon. Growing up in a National Park Service family with a bird-loving father influenced her passion for protecting wildlife and wild places. Through prose and poetry, she seeks to bridge the divide separating people from nature. Her book, Halcyon Journey, In Search of the Belted Kingfisher, won a 2022 National Outdoor Book Award and the Forward Indies Award. Since we first asked Marina to share her study on the belted kingfisher with us, we've learned she will also be receiving the 2024 John Burroughs Medal for Distinguished Natural History Writing in Book Form. She joins the ranks of Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson, and Robin Kimmerer in receiving this prestigious award. Wow. Marina has an MA degree in journalism from the University of Montana and a BA in biology from the University of Oregon. She also writes a bi-monthly blog of prose and poetry called Kingfisher Journey. I'll put that link in the chat. So please share any questions for Marina in the chat. And Marina, we are so honored and delighted to have you join us tonight. I'm turning the session over to you.
Well, thank you, Cindy. That was a beautiful introduction, and I am indeed humbled about this new award that just happened. So I'll be heading to New York City in a couple weeks to receive it, give a little talk. But I'm so happy this evening to be presenting to you. And I'm going to go right ahead and share my screen so we can get some beautiful photos of kingfishers going. I'm so happy to present to this group, and I hope you will enjoy my journey tonight. And I will say, when Steve Byers reached out to me, I was struck by his words that he wrote. He said, "It feels like the Friends have been on a Halcyon journey of our own now for 20 years to promote, establish, and help build the refuge." So that intrigued me right away. And I'm so happy to learn all about, as much as I have, about Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge and your dream and how you've been building that. And indeed, I do think there's something parallel with my journey, my personal journey with kingfishers, as I hope you'll see. And also, you could not have picked a better mascot. As you said too, Cassie, they are urban areas and rural and all across North America. So a great choice for many reasons. So I had put a mascot right there for everyone to see. I'd like to begin with humble gratitude for the indigenous peoples who have known the Belted Kingfisher since time immemorial. Rattle greetings from the Kingfisher. I'm also going to share some indigenous names I've learned for the kingfisher. The first two are from tribes on the Oregon coast. Kuzhanis is Chidichis, Sayusla and Lower Umpqua, Chiahi. And in Salish, over in Montana, where a lot of my book is based, Tishlis. And in Yurok, the tribe that's in Northern California, Chilal. So I hope you see what I see, that they sound a little bit like where a kingfisher lives, a watery sound. And here's my book. And as part of receiving this medal, I discovered that John Burroughs wrote this essay. I didn't know he'd written it. I've been a fan of John Burroughs, an early naturalist, and who wrote a book called The Art of Seeing, which informed my book quite a bit. But he also wrote this: Halcyon, our kingfisher, is a good guide when you go into the woods. He will not ensure smooth water or fair weather, but he knows every stream like a book and will take you to the wildest and most unfrequented places. Well, my book also has 16 illustrations by this talented Oregon artist who's also funny, Ram Papish. And after my book came out in the spring of 2022, my friends and other people started sending me pictures of where they were reading the book. So I'd like you to encourage, if you who have my book or will buy one, it's okay to get the pages and covers wet. Take that book outdoors. I think the Kingfisher will approve. And then the picture of me up in the top corner has something to do with the book. I hiked to the top of this peak. It's an 18-mile round trip with my son and my husband in Missoula after it came out, because the top of that peak is the headwaters of the Rattlesnake Creek, and it's an important part of the book. So maybe you'll take the book out on Nippersink Creek and paddle on the canoe trail with my book in hand, and maybe you'll hear a rattle of a kingfisher at the same time. So let's get started with a little bit about the bird. I love putting the robin and the kingfisher together because the birds are not too different in size. The kingfisher is just a little bit bigger. But as you can see, the difference is quite striking when you look at the shapes, with that big head of the kingfisher and that cool roguish crest and that dagger beak. I will say the robin's trying to compete with a little bit of, berries in the beak. Say, look, I can hold two. And you won't find the Belted Kingfisher hopping around like a robin in a yard, because look at the size of those tiny feet of a kingfisher. And also, kingfishers are wary and territorial. You won't be flocking with robins or at all. Well, there's many superlatives about this bird. Of course, the name says it all, the great anglers. And after a kingfisher catches a fish, then what they will often do is flip that fish around so that the head goes right down the beak and they swallow it whole, and the scales will be smooth and going down the gullet in an easy way instead of the wrong way around, with the tail first. In a pinch, might catch a crayfish. Now, this is where I want to start reading an excerpt. So tonight I'll read some excerpts from the book. I thought it would be fun. And one thing that I meant to mention earlier is many of the photographs of kingfishers in this presentation are by Charles Wheeler. And I especially want to dedicate this presentation to him tonight because sadly he passed away recently. And he was a marvelous photographer of kingfishers in Idaho and shared a lot of photos with me. So these two here look a lot like something that happened early on in my book. I saw her, a female kingfisher, perched on a fallen tree, moored in the center of the river. Her crested head was the blue of washed denim, tousled and sodden. White neck feathers formed a gleaming ring above a slate boob band that dipped to a point on her snowy chest. Below that, a rusty red belt clasped in mid-belly and draped down both flanks, partly hidden by closed wings of blue-gray hues. Only the female wears the namesake belt, and that could be meaningful. In contrast, a male shows a single bluish upper band, like a prim bandana on his white breast. In the bird world, males are almost always more colorful than females when there's a difference between the two. The rare gender reversal drew me in like the myth. You'll be hearing more about that. Could I chase clues to this puzzle that scientists had yet to solve? A male flew in, a pinwheel of whites and thunderous blues. His flurry of notes pattered like rain. She preened her wet feathers. He landed and then lifted off, each downward wing stroke scooping the heavy air. She followed him skyward, wheeling to expose white underwings with the reddish plumage extending to her armpits, like the work of a slapdash painter. Circling once, they descended in unison to the same driftwood that parted the currents. He looked upriver, and she swiveled her head to glance downriver. Out in the middle of the turbid Yellowstone River, the pair seemed unperturbed by the torrent. Or were they? Perhaps their hearts beat faster in each other's presence, like two people on a park bench in the rain, wildly attracted to each other. Well, if all goes well with the pair, they end up nesting, not in a stick nest, but in an earthen bank, deep in an earthen bank. That's a tennis-sized bald hole, and these tunnels can extend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet deep, slightly upward, and you'll hear more about that. Well, the Belted Kingfisher is not the only kingfisher in the world. In fact, there's quite a few. And if some of you want to quickly put in the chat how many kinds of kingfishers they think there are, how many species in the world, I will give a hint. The number keeps going up just because of the way we split species. So we'll see at the end. I'm not looking at the chat, but if you guessed 120, you're right. Usually people guess a lot less, fewer. Well, they are on every continent except Antarctica. But here, as we know, the Belted Kingfisher is our North American kingfisher. But down by the Mexico border, you will run into the ringed green and sometimes the Amazon. But yet, no matter where you go in the world, no matter how radiant, no matter how long their tails, they have these big heads, dagger bills, tiny feet, and they're burrow nesters. And they can range in size from this African dwarf kingfisher that fits in the palm of your hand like a hummingbird, all the way to the laughing kookaburra, the big kingfisher in Australia. And not all are fishing birds. Some are sit and wait in the jungle. More than half of the species, sadly, are at risk from critically endangered to vulnerable. Well, fortunately, our North American bird is in pretty good shape. You can see that the kingfisher's range extends all the way across. The orangey color up top is where kingfishers are in the summer, but as you can imagine, in the far north, when waters freeze over, the kingfishers have to shift down to the purple area, which is the year-round range of kingfishers. And the blue is wintering range. And this is an interesting thing. It's only the females that migrate, and not all of them will migrate depending on where you live. I'm not sure what the story is at Hackmatack, but they will go all the way down to the tip of South America, the northern tip. But I will say that Megastro Halcyon, that's the Latin name, is still a bird we have to worry about because there are 1 million fewer than there were in 1970. And we've seen this huge decline in our bird populations. So we have to be vigilant to make sure kingfishers are still in our lives and all the waterways that go with them. Like this beautiful Nippersink and creek. And I think hope for kingfishers and all the waters lies in people like you, people who are volunteering and rolling up your sleeves to protect and restore rivers and wetlands and adjacent habitats. This core and corridor idea I love. And all the way to Missoula, Montana, I feel there's just this connection between us. Even though I'm not a Midwesterner, I feel the kingfisher connects and links us across all kinds of borders. So the heartbeat of my story pulses along Rattlesnake Creek in Missoula, Montana, where a pair of kingfishers still court, nest, and tend their young to the music of rollicking currents. Over the course of 7 years, from spring 2008 through summer to 2015, I followed with curiosity as the birds continued to baffle, elude, and enlighten. So it is a little bit like your journey, that one season wasn't enough. There's a lot of obstacles. You have to stay with it. Sometimes you have to bring in other people. You definitely do. So there were times when I was alone on this and others when friends helped me out. This is the setting for where I did a lot of my following of kingfishers, Rattlesnake Creek, and that you can see the valley. That upper part of the White Valley is where I particularly was looking for a nesting pair, and I lived in that valley too. Rattlesnake Creek flows 22 miles from the wilderness headwaters in Rattlesnake National Recreation Area, all the way to the confluence of the Clark Fork River going through Missoula, where the University of Montana is. And on this map, when you can see it in the book, there are Salish names, and that's the tribe and the homeland. And throughout, I tried to make sure I paid respect to that tribe and their word for the kingfisher, Tishalese. Well, how do you think this word Halcyon connects to kingfishers at all? That's the myth I'm talking about. So in chapter 1, I start the book this way. Leaning over the balcony railing of the second-story bedroom, I listened to the surge of Rattlesnake Creek flooding 2 blocks away. Close by, a yellow warbler sang the morning into buttery sweetness. Robins caroled, magpies squawked, but the ringing staccato of the bird I longed to hear would never mingle with backyard birds. Instead, the belted kingfisher would be pelting downstream on strong wings, always looking for fish. Minutes earlier, I had read the dictionary word of the day, and that's what I read right there, what you're seeing. And I knew about Halcyon as peace and calm and happiness, but I had no idea there was a kingfisher involved. And I was really excited to check out the myth. Tracing the Halcyon definition to an ancient Greek myth, I read of 2 lovers, Halcyon and Ceyx, transformed by the gods Zeus and Hera into kingfishers, destined to nest annually over the winter solstice. Then Aeolus, god of the winds and father of Halcyon, would calm the rough waves for 14 days, 7 on either side of the solstice. Sailors called this interlude the Halcyon days, bracketed by storms. Well, this is the common kingfisher, the one you would see in Greece, and a cutaway of what it would look like in the burrow, because they do not nest out on the ocean, on the sea, but deep in a burrow. But who cares? It's a myth, right? Since childhood, I dreamed of feathers, light hollow bones, and lofting above the earth on wings that would never let me fall. Pursue a bird of happiness and transformation? I was in. This is a picture of me when I was age 8 with my older brother, who was 9, in Mount Rainier National Park, where my father was the assistant superintendent at the time there and had a profound influence on my love of the West. Well, I got also interested in what other myths of the kingfisher were out there, particularly the belted kingfisher. So there's a chapter in my book called Winter Story where I'm exploring a lot of indigenous stories and history involving the belted kingfisher. And this myth has to do with transformation. It's a favorite of mine. Without the help of the kingfisher, the Arikara people of the Great Plains would not have found a better world. To journey westward from a hiding place underground, after the Creator sent floodwaters to eliminate giants, 3 birds helped them overcome obstacles to reach a better place: a kingfisher, an owl, and a loon. Coming to a chasm, Kingfisher reshaped the earth and laid down an enormous beak that served as a bridge. With a great flapping of wings, Owl cleared a thorny forest, and Fast Flying Loon parted a lake. The people could choose whether to continue or turn into the book that helped them. A kingfisher? I'd be tempted. And that's a great gray owl I chose there. Well, when it came to Rattlesnake Creek and my quest to find the kingfishers, I soon discovered that I would need all the help I could get. So, and I found that with a number of friends and also just through my own persistence and learning and stumbling along the way. So in the first season there, where it was very intense in 2009, I spent a lot of time out there and eventually found nest banks where the kingfishers nested, but I couldn't find the hole for the longest time. And this is a little, just a couple sentences from when my best friend Sandra came to visit me and sat with me for hours every day looking at this bank. You can kind of see the holes along the upper edge there. And it's like a guessing game because only one hole is active every year, and yet you have lots from years prior years, and sometimes they remodel. And then there could be some part of the bank you're not even seeing. So, but while we were there, scents of wild onion buffed the air. Furled maple leaves dusted the sky. A wild turkey promenaded past us, his hot pink wattle flashing like an orchid in the jungle depths. The first mosquito of the season bit Sandra's forehead. Not total bliss, but it was a nice May day while we were looking. But fortunately, a very exciting thing did happen. Oops. I found the hole. It was quite a story. A female kingfisher docked on an immense boulder protruding from the far side of the creek. She bore a silvery minnow held lengthwise within her beak. Rattling once, she cranked upward and into the perfect nest hole, the one I had missed all along. The round hole showed the telltale 2 furrow marks at the base and rested about 2 feet down from the top of the bank and only 4 feet up from the Canaris Creek. Well, I was mesmerized, and whenever a kingfisher sleeted into view with the fish, I was on high alert, questions eddied. But the kingfishers were on high alert too. They did not like me anywhere near, so I ordered a camouflage hunting blind for hunting turkeys and proved to be just the right thing. I set it up on this little island between me and the bank where I could hide, but things had changed. For instance, this. Bang, a dipper clanged into the front screen. I ducked as if someone had thrown a dirt clod. The groggy bird staggered to his feet and lurched into the air. The dipper's world had changed too. And as you'll find out when you read my book, the blind only helped so much because those are wary birds and they can see the slightest movement in the blind. But there were a lot of times when I was in hours in the blind watching when the kingfishers weren't coming and going. So you just had this quiet time. And those were really reflective times. This is my father and my son when my son was 5 and now he's 26. So he sadly died in 2002 of cancer when he was 70. So I was healing a lot doing this journey alone on the creek and found that there. Hiding in a camouflage blind, I merged with the alders, cottonwoods, and pines. When a Swainson's thrush landed within grasp and opened his beak to sing, I nodded to yet another sign of my bird-loving father's presence, as if we could still revel in the soloist poet of the wafting, spiraling away verse. In the company of creekside inhabitants, sorrows and losses cascaded into the clear waters where bull trout finned upstream to spawn. Well, eventually, it takes about a month after the chicks hatch for the birds to fledge, and they've been in this deep, dark burrow, football-sized burrow, quite a ways back in, and one by one they start exploring, peeking out, and this is actually one of the chicks, and that is the hole from the 2009 season. And I love this image because it makes me think of that, that what would it be like to be in this dark burrow and come out and you've heard the creek, but then to look out over this sparkling waters and forests and lively place. And I hope we can each do that every day to some extent and know what a miracle it is to be alive in this world. Well, right away, though, once they fledge, there's not a lot of time before they are on their own. The adults feed the young ones for only a week or so, and then they pretty much have to start figuring it out on their own. And there's dangers out there. Like this is a goshawk, and this juvenile kingfisher, and you can tell it's a juvenile because of that bronze in the upper band. He's looking up, which is smart because danger comes from above from accipiters. So Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, goshawks are all predators. And then there's learning to fly. Well, only a few days after leaving the nest hole, the juveniles had entered a critical phase of flight training. Hollow bones and feathered wings were the given essentials, but the nuances of flying kingfisher style would take practice. And I saw over the years of watching some very, very funny times with the young learning in this little pond by this mountain water dam that is now gone. And but they learned there, and they would belly flop and catch pine needles and do crash landings. They were hilarious. But eventually they get the hang of it, and look at what they have to do. It's such a marvelous thing, the way a belted kingfisher can do that beautiful smooth dive into the water with not one splash. That wedge-shaped head is just ideal for entering from the air into the water. And there's much to say about the fabulous kingfisher dive headfirst into the water, and you can read quite a bit about it in my book. But I will say that those sharp eyes are full of cones for good color viewing, and they have red oil droplets, which help with refraction so they can see better into the water. And then there's hovering. Imagine what that would be like to have to beat your wings against the wind, to stay still, and then still watch for fish below. So if you notice a kingfisher hovering, you'll see the head is rock steady, and meanwhile the wings are beating, the tail's moving, and these neck muscles have to be powerful to hold that head still so that the bird can see the fish below. So sometimes a kingfisher perches from above the water hovering, sometimes directly from a perch. And aren't they good at catching fish? Amazing. I was particularly amazed how, when I was watching them feeding their young, how they really could pick the exact same size of fish for the week they were in. And that's how you could tell how old the chicks were, because when the chicks were tiny, you could barely see the fish and held vertically in the bill. But each week they fished for bigger fish as the chicks grew. And there can be anywhere from like 3 to 5 or 6, even 7 chicks in a burrow. That splash on the side that you see is, of course, not from a kingfisher diving in smoothly, but it's the flapping of the wings hard on the water to push off again and rise so quickly back up into the air, which it takes incredible power. Well, after the first season, I got serious about my curiosity about the mystery of why the female is more colorful than the male. And so it took me to all kinds of places. So just briefly, I'll share that I went to the Lower Rio Grande to meet the closest relative, the ringed kingfisher, see what I could find out. I went to the Washington, D.C. Smithsonian and the Bird Hall and the back areas, and I pulled out drawer after drawer of study skins and looked at the belts and size and patterns. And then I even made it over to South Africa to meet another relative, the giant kingfisher. And I know somebody on the chat said they saw malachite in Africa. So did I, as well as several other species. That was a joy. And then I'd come back to Rattlesnake Creek and often join my naturalist friends, Paul and Lisa Hendricks. And they still to this day are following kingfishers. They got excited soon after I did. And they're the ones who most often joined me over the years. Paul is a very skilled zoologist. Lisa is a retired now school teacher, but he had a lot to do with helping me with some of the more scientific parts of my curious observations. And over the years, that's the thing. In this journey, it would not have been enough to just follow kingfishers one season. The first season, I never saw them mating, for instance. I was spending so much time even just trying to find them. But then they became a little more predictable as I started knowing where this one pair, and not always the same pair, would nest on Rattlesnake Creek, but they have sort of predictable spots, like, and you would find things like this. And also, oh, it's so exciting to finally see them dig a burrow. And that brings up another part of the journey. And I'll just mention that if you spend enough time, and anyone can do this, following a species that you love, you might see something that's never been documented before. So Paul and Lisa and I have a publication in the Wilson Journal of Ornithology called Aerial Ramming by Belted Kingfishers, where we did indeed see what had never been documented before, kingfishers flying from about 12 feet away from the vertical nest bank and slamming into the bank beak first to start a nest hole. And they did that for 3 mornings in a row one spring. And it was just kind of difficult to watch. You were sure they're getting concussions. So look closely, you never know what you'll find out there. And as part of our little research, there's Lisa and Paul and I, one time we waded across the creek because the nest is always on the other side from the trail, fortunately. And we dug back into the back of a burrow to see what it was like. Measured 4.5 feet back with the tape measure through the hole, and then the distance down. And I'm making a funny face because the soil smells like uric acid, and it's from the chicks. But what's interesting is when they're young, they have a different chemistry for digestion than the parents. So they can digest fish bones, and then they tidally kick them, the little uric acid, back in the back of the burrow and make it all nice. So it's not really messy in there. So, but when they get to be adults, oops, this is what they do. So they shift again, the acid levels change, and they have to expel the fish bones as pellets, something you might look for. But here's something else. Besides kingfishers, if you're out long enough for any reason at any times of day and sitting quietly, you start to notice and see quite a few other species of wildlife and that are sharing this home. And these are some of the birds I particularly came to enjoy: the varied thrush, spotted sandpiper, cedar waxwing, dipper. And one time, this happened. Seeking the Halcyon bird, I've come closer to wildlife than ever before. Like one afternoon in late September of 2011, seated by the upper nest bank, drinking in the domain of kingfishers with no real purpose. The creek bubbled over a glossy rock with a gulp and glug, and maroon dogwood leaves shook in a slight breeze. Then, like a river phantom, a sinewy mink flowed over my outstretched bare legs. Feeling the rippling of chocolate-hued fur, I knew the meaning of becoming one with the wild neighborhood. And that's the creek itself. You can see the gorgeous palette of stones of Rattlesnake Creek. Well, I did eventually move, and I chose to come back to Oregon. The kingfisher's rollicking, rolling, ratchety staccato calls signal our awakening. Attend to be alive is to spread our wings and see where they take us. And may you all spread your wings, Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge friends, and all you are doing on your journey to protect the core and corridor of this exciting place I hope to see sometime. And I wanted to share this quote by Henry David Thoreau because it seemed to fit well with what you're doing. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put foundations under them. And that's what you're doing. And there's your map with the blue at the corridors where the kingfishers are the mascot, and the green, they're connecting the core areas. And so there, one foundation after another is being built. It's truly exciting and inspiring for the rest of us in this country. And because of that, I've decided to do something I don't usually do in my presentations. I'm going to read this part of the end of my chapter, my last chapter of the book. The kingfishers of the Aracora origin story laid a great beak across a canyon for people to cross to a better world. Today, the mythical beak invites us to traverse from despair to hope and from passivity to action on behalf of nature that is us. Like people harmed by terrible injustices in healing only with tender support, the natural world has a way of renewing, given a chance. Free a pine tree from barbed wire cutting deep into the bark and come back to see the vibrant new needles. Clear the way of invasive plants, and in the soil lie native seeds waiting to sprout. Close ditches that diverted life-giving waters into suburban lawns, and the stricken creeks will again brim with insects and fish. Take down artificial dams with care and restore beavers to their natural keystone role of creating pools, and watch them store water, nurture fish, and attract my favorite bird. We can't restore extinct species. We can't bring back centuries-old forests after logging. We can't give up. My esteemed conservationist friend Brock Evans often rallies the younger generation to embrace hopeless lost causes and points to the victories of wilderness, wild rivers, and protecting ancient forests and endangered species. He likes to share a favorite quote he adapted from architect Daniel Burnham: "Dream only large dreams, for they have the power to fire people's souls." Our waterways give, and we must give back. Our wilderness-fed streams and rivers are essential. These are the waters that can best weather the climate chaos if we honor their rights to flow clean, clear, cold, flooding, and free to merge with wetlands and intact forests, which store carbon, exhale oxygen, and sustain life. Every native bird, animal, and flower interweaves within a community of cooperation. When it comes to belted kingfishers, their trilling, consonant-rich calls above waterways send a message the Salish people have known since time immemorial. Water is life. Treat wild waters as you would an elder. Listen to their wisdom. Honor the complex web of riparian plants and forests vital to shading, cooling, and nourishing thousands of species converging on these living ribbons of lush green. Well, the kingfisher remains my compass, my way of finding true north. I'm always alert to the awakening call. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. I think what I'll do is keep this on for just a few minutes in case anyone wants to write down this information. Feel free to send me an email if you want. Marina Richie 1, you have to put in the 1 at gmail.com. I love to hear from you. And then that's my blog. Kingfisher Journey is really just my name, marinarichie.com. So thank you, friends of Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. I think I will go ahead then and stop my share so we can all be on together.
Oh, Marina, thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. So yeah, if people want to turn on your cameras and turn on your mics, and we're open for questions for Marina. I think there's a couple things in the chat. Nancy Williams says, Marina, thank you for sharing how the kingfisher spans and connects the landscapes of the Midwest and those of the West. Linda Effling says, what a wonderful presentation. Mary Jo Lucas Healy, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I know earlier we had comments on how your photos were amazing and great illustrations. Wonderful story and so encouraging from Ed Collins. Yeah, are there other folks who've got thoughts you want to share? I did put one question in the chat because I wanted to not forget it. My question was, do kingfishers always nest in those sloughing banks, or where else do they nest?
Oh, great question. I'd never get to cover everything. Well, that's their primary nesting spot. They have been known to, because they are adaptable birds, they've been known to nest like in a gravel pit if it's not too far and if it's not sloughing off enough. That's the trick, is they have whatever their substrate, they have to be able to dig, but it can't collapse. So, or also if you're a certain kind of bank, it can have too many roots in it or too many rocks so they can't get through. But another thing they will do is, and I've seen this, is when there is a tipped over tree and there's a big root wad and there's a lot of soil and it's facing the water, they can dig a nest hole into that tree root as long as there's enough soil. And then I've heard that they can even use beaver slides. So there are other places. Yes, good question.
That's so interesting. And I mean, as we talked about, we have lots of paddling on Nipperson Creek, so people will now have to keep their eye out when they're paddling and look for kingfisher homes.
Yes, you will. So I hope you'll know what to look for now. And if you do find an active one, you do need to watch from a distance. They are super protective and territorial and do not like you to come close. So, but I think being on the water is a great way, to canoe. It's so great you have the canoe trail, and kayak.
Yes, Cynthia says she loves paddleboarding on the Fox River and she's seen kingfishers. So she's going to try and follow one.
I'm a paddleboarder too, and I've seen them that way. It's hard though to hold binoculars.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, any more questions for folks? Just, turn off your mic.
Unmute.
Speak up. Oh, Nancy and Steve got questions.
I have a question. There are not that many exposed banks on some of the stretches of the Nipperson Creek or even the Fox River, and I'm wondering if that's considered a limiting factor for populations of kingfishers.
It can be a limiting factor indeed, because nest banks aren't always available. And then the other thing is they're pretty territorial. So depending on how many fish there are in the Nipperson, they will divide up their territory even when they're not nesting. So they don't like to share. So for instance, a typical thing might be like if you had kingfishers on a river nesting and there are enough banks, they might be along every mile or two. If you had the ideal situation, and also just to fish there. But one thing that's possible, and you might check this out, is if there's some kind of bank that might work that's not on the river, but within a half mile, they have been known to fly away to nest.
Okay.
Okay, and I wanted to ask, you gave a recognizing feature of a juvenile kingfisher.
Yes.
What is that again? I missed it.
So instead of being that blue-gray color in that upper band, it's got a bronze, a mix of blue and bronze.
Okay.
Kind of a brown. And that's how you can tell. And another thing that's interesting is in that first several months, the males, I find this really interesting, have some red on them, which they lose. But it doesn't form an actual second band. It doesn't become a belt. But you will see a little reddish under their armpits and a little bit in there. So that can confuse people sometimes. But then they lose that when they get their adult plumage.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is it always on streams and rivers where they nest, or they ever be somewhere like on the shores of Lake Michigan?
They would definitely be somewhere like the shores of Lake Michigan. I watched them nesting on the Oregon coast. I have several spots I watch in bays where it's a little quieter because they have perfect sandstone cliffs that are just right for digging. And then, they like, as long as they find great fish in the bays. One thing, I wonder, a lot of it does depend on the substrate, like around Lake Michigan. Is it too rocky? But
there's a place up on Lake Michigan that I know of where there's bank swallows that nest. So I was just thinking whether I should walk further down that and see if there might be kingfishers somewhere near there too.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Laura, because that's a great idea. If you see bank swallows nesting, that's very good spot to look for a nesting kingfisher, and they will share the same bank with bank swallows. So if you see a tennis ball sized hole and then the bank swallow holes are a lot smaller, that very well could be a kingfisher nest there. So great idea to look there, and I hope you find one.
I will
Okay.
definitely look.
Yeah,
I'll report back if I do.
please do.
Cynthia, I see you got a question.
Yeah, I really took note of your mention of beavers and you know that keystone species, and have been learning about beavers since a conference that my organization organized, and our first talk was about beavers. And the movement toward more, respect for beavers and living alongside nature's engineers. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see out in Oregon? And beautiful state, by the way. I went there for the first time last September. Fell in love with Depot Bay.
Oh yeah,
And
great whale watching.
yeah, and Bend. But I thought that was really interesting. And is there some movement toward connecting those species because they are so beneficial to one another?
Well, you're absolutely right. And kingfishers, I have seen an interesting rewilding project going on where people are building these beaver analogs, you might have heard, to bring beavers back to streams where they don't have enough willows and trees along the river for them to actually feed on and make a dam with. So they sort of help them out with building these analogs. And then there's restoration work where these damaged streams are being returned to a higher level so they can even have the beavers. And I was out there writing a story about that, and the section below, so literally this creek it was so damaged. This is like about an hour from me in the Ochiko Mountains on private land, where the creek had literally disappeared underwater. Well, you couldn't even, there was no water. I mean, and so they're really working to restore that. But the section below where the water came back up and was flowing again, oh my gosh, the kingfishers were just having a heyday with the fish, and so thick, and the beaver action was one dam after another. And then of course the songbirds are thick there too. And it's just, you're right, it's an absolutely important keystone species, and there's efforts going on in our state to restore and bring them back. And I like the idea. I don't know if there's been a lot of work really on connecting kingfishers and beavers, but you have to imagine before the era of all the trapping that happened in the 1800s, that there were probably more kingfishers. I mean, yes, there's a limiting factor of the nesting, but that habitat would have been spectacular for them. So go beavers.
Thank
Even
you.
though I am a duck, University of Oregon is a duck, Oregon State.
Yeah, well, we have a couple of projects. I know the Land Conservancy of McHenry County has a couple of projects where people were concerned about the beavers on their land, flooding, and they're working with beavers. So both in the Dutch Creek watershed, which is just south of the Nippersink watershed, and then over in the Kishwaukee River watershed that drains the western part of our county. And I too took note of when Marina talked about taking out dams, because that's a project that we've got underway on the Fox River that the Nippersink feeds into. So,
that's great. That's wonderful to hear. It was kind of an interesting thing, that the picture, that was a little dam on Rattlesnake Creek that you saw toward the end. And that's gone because it used to be a private water company that owned that, and it was kind of a backup water supply to Missoula that wasn't used. But the city of Missoula bought it from the private water company. It was a big project to buy it, and then they decided to do a major rewilding restoration. And at first, the kingfishers were a little disturbed because it was pretty close to where they nest, and that was where the young ones were learning to fish. But now they're filling back in, and beavers are moving up and down like crazy, and it's wonderful to see.
That's great. Oh yeah, Tom just put in the chat, the mascot of the University of Illinois is now the Belted Kingfisher. So That's pretty exciting.
I've been following that. Did that officially happen though? I know the students were cheering it on, and there was some resistance from the powers that be, but they overcame it, right? Is this the
Yeah,
Urbana?
maybe. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Tom's the one who put it in the chat. Did you check and make sure it was official, Tom?
I hope it is.
So it is the student voted a mascot of the University of Illinois. Yeah.
Well, I'm with the students. They've done a great job. They have a website, and I know they've got all these great like gear with kingfishers on them and funny cartoons, and it's kind of fun to watch. So yes.
Well, any more questions from anyone? And maybe Pete, do you want to mention what's happening on Saturday? We might get a few takers for our event.
We're having our next stewardship day Saturday from 1 to 4 at the Tryon Grove Hackmatack site, one of the newest, if not the newest site on the refuge, right there on Tryon Grove Road, a few miles west of Route 12. And we're right now we're removing a fence line. It's kind of slow work, but it's very rewarding. It's going to open up the view of the large field being restored there to the east of Keystone Road. So we'd welcome some help. If we can get a nice group going, we might be able to just about finish it this Saturday. So
Not likely to see a kingfisher there, but there is a good chance you might see a northern harrier. So
yeah, there's a northern harrier every time we go there, and he's just kind of flying low over the vegetation. It's a really beautiful thing. So he's waiting for us to finish.
Great, thanks, Pete. I see Mary Gallagher has a beautiful belted kingfisher for her screenshot for Zoom. That's wonderful.
And I will say, Mary Gallagher is my friend. So she is.
Oh,
she lives in Leavenworth, Washington. And she is an incredible fan of kingfishers. So.
Welcome, Mary.
All right.
Yeah, we're so glad you could join us, Mary. And Nancy's saying in the chat, Marina, that she hopes you'd be able to come to Illinois someday. We'll paddle the Nippersink and look for kingfishers.
Oh, I would love that. It looks so beautiful and really inspiring what you're all doing. So,
and you might as well bring your paddleboard. I'll take you on the Fox. and we're getting rid of the dam, so we'll have 9 miles of floating.
Perfect. Well, I still have my little pop-up camper that I travel in, and that I was in for a year in my roving phase of life. And I do have an inflatable paddleboard that you can fit inside it. So, road trip.
We'll find a kayak for you and paddle.
Kayak would be great. Thank you. And let me know if any of you are out this part of Oregon sometime too.
One thing when we were talking with Marina yesterday and kind of just prepping for today, good suggestion to suggest that your local library get a copy of her book. And I especially with the Belted Kingfisher becoming the mascot or ambassador for Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, I'm going to stop in at my local library, the Nippersink Library, and make a suggestion to our librarians. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Cindy. And I also would encourage people who are buying the book, of course, to support independent bookstores. And so if you have a chance to do that, either locally or online, always like to help them out. So thank you again. What a wonderful crowd. And I apologize for my little rough start, but we did get rolling.
Don't worry about it.
I was just going to say something, Marina. This is Mary Gallagher. One thing, my husband took that kingfisher photo from our kayak, so we love watching kingfishers from the water. But secondly, isn't there an audio book out too?
There is an audio book out now of my book. I was not the narrator, but there is an audiobook. And so for those who like audio, give it a try. Thanks for mentioning that, Mary. Mary's good at remembering everything I forget. What else, Mary? So, but I hope, I just really appreciate all of you and wish you good luck and good stewardship and many, many more acres conserved. And the Kingfisher is going to be linking it all together for you.
Well, thank you very much, Marina. Great,
You're welcome.
great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
A great spring gathering for us.
Yeah.
Here's to spring.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
We're going to continue with great programming. And Marina, we have
You set the standard.
Yeah, and we have relatives out in Oregon, so maybe we'll see you. Okay.
Maybe you will.
That'd be great.
There's kingfishers on the Deschutes River. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Thanks so
thank
much.
you all. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.